One team that was expected to drop in performance in the upcoming season, or at least catch up with it, is Red Bull. The FIA intervened with new regulations, and Red Bull has been penalized with time deductions in the wind tunnel facilities and the CFD factories. Yet, this seems to not be enough to clamp down on the Austrian team, as the new innovations left the whole sport in shock. So what are the new innovations applied to the RB19? Why will the new regulations not hurt Red Bull nearly as much as everyone hoped? And is the sport in trouble when it comes to the competitiveness of the other teams? This video has all of the answers, so make sure you watch it until the end to find out. In 2022, Red Bull absolutely stunned the entire sport when they were the only car to not porpoise. Alpine struggled with porpoising in the first couple of races, just like any other team. But they managed to fix this issue by giving away performance, which was the only acceptable way once the season started. However, teams like Mercedes weren't happy with what they were seeing ahead of them, such as the back of the Red Bull car, which is why they had to lobby hard at the FIA in order to change the rules. Indeed, the governing body made changes in two ways. The first was in the second half of the season, when they restricted floor flexing, and the second was in the technical regulations, when the edges were increased by 15 millimeters and the floor by 10 millimeters, as well as the diffuser throat. With the first rule tweak that was implemented from Spa onwards, we saw literally no change in the performance of Red Bull, even though Mercedes were 100% sure that they would be closer in the last 9 races of the season. And despite the Silver Arrow's bids to the FIA to make the game easier for them, it appears that this narrative will continue in 2023. Red Bull is a team that understands the regulations better than anybody else, and even though they will have less time to spend in the aerodynamic facilities, that doesn't mean that the genius minds of Pierre Wache and Adrian Newey will have less innovation in their heads. Even with the prohibitions and penalties, the Austrian team has found the perfect innovation for the upcoming season, and they have told the other teams that they do not stand a chance in 2023, 1 month before the season starts. So, before we go into Red Bull's design and the innovation behind it, let's talk a bit about the regulations and why the Austrian team won't suffer from them a single bit with the car that they've built. The new regulations are just a tweak, not an implementation of something brand new. And if teams haven't understood what needs to be done in the 2022 season, then it's very unlikely that these changes will be enough to make teams like Mercedes competitive straight out of the gate. Keep in mind that the governing body issued a statement stating that they are unsure whether the new regulations will be sufficient to eliminate porpoising. Nicolas Tombazis addressed the issue, and while experts feared that the FIA had rushed the new regulations for the 2023 season, Tombazis' statement only proves this further. When asked about this, Nicolas stated that only time will tell whether these regulations were successful in eradicating porpoising. The fact that the FIA isn't convinced of something speaks volumes about the need for teams to create their own innovative designs, something Red Bull has excelled at throughout the team's history. What exactly is this innovative design? Many thought that Red Bull had built the perfect car last year, with the RB18 being the most competitive car to exit production, and it couldn't get better than that. Those who thought this should be reminded that Adrian Newey sits in the garage and draws designs that could be implemented on the next generation car. Two of the things that are going to see changes for the upcoming season are the floor and the side pod design. Obviously, the regulations dictate this, but it goes without saying that Red Bull will find an even more innovative way to implement the change compared to the other teams. For example, even though the floor will be thicker in the central area to battle the flexing phenomenon, which is prohibited for the upcoming season, the engineers have managed to make it lighter than the 2022 version, which was thinner. This is basically defying the odds of physics, and there is hardly a team that can go against that. To top that off, the side pods will retain the characteristic shape of the squared inlets with a lower lip that inform the front upper edge of the underside of the side pod channel. However, a change will be introduced here as well, with the cutouts under the side pods creating a double floor effect, topped with an extension towards the rear of these particular cutouts at the base of the side pods. Red Bull have posted a picture of the draft version of their car, one that's supposed to meet the world on the 3rd of February in New York. And while the changes that we can see with our naked eye aren't that noticeable, the new car is going to be massively different compared to the RB18. This is where the innovation comes to light, with Red Bull actually building a car that will be 90% different in terms of aerodynamical prospects compared to the best car that came out of production from the Austrian team, the RB18. How is this possible? We don't want to repeat ourselves again and again, but it's the engineers. Pierre Waché and Adrian Newey have implemented an array of changes on the parts that, although they look nearly the same as the RB18, will boost the performance of the RB19 in a huge manner. Keep in mind that the aerodynamical profile of the car involves parts like curvatures, fillets, and edges, as well as the angles and development of the surfaces in direct contact with the airstream. Obviously, the new generation of the car generates downforce from its floor, and with the increased ride height, the floor needs to be a bit stiffer in order for the car to prevent the flexing phenomenon. Although this has been achieved by all of the teams, they have added additional weight to their cars by making the floor stiffer, which is a normal consequence of this action. But that's not the case with Red Bull. The Austrian team made the floor even lighter while also applying the necessary thickness, which is something that has left many jaws in the garage dropping to the floor. The volumes, sections, and profiles of the Venturi channels have experienced the much-needed changes in order to be considered innovations in the design, and it's no surprise that this comes from the team that dominated the aerodynamic era from 2010 to 2013. And yes, everything that Red Bull brought to the new car is more than enough for us to consider this a brand new project, one that will be vastly different compared to the RB18, and as things stand, even more competitive. So, there is a huge danger that poses itself to the sport right now, which is Red Bull dominating the league and Verstappen winning races with no one near him. This is something that happened from 2014 to 2020 with Mercedes, and keep in mind that the dominance of one team could bore the viewers and the fans, which would go on to result in dropped popularity and directly dropped revenue. After the sport has experienced a boost in popularity with the show Drive to Survive and the highly anticipated season in 2021, this is the last thing Formula One needs. But Red Bull isn't the team to be blamed for that. After all, everyone else had a full year to learn what went wrong. And even though Red Bull had the upper hand compared to their fiercest competitors, that doesn't mean that everyone should eventually give up and wait for 2026, when new regulations should come upon us. This is also the year when Audi and Andretti are supposed to join the sport, with the latter still waiting for the green light from the FIA. Nonetheless, the sport is in huge danger, and while Red Bull and its fans will be more than happy to see yet another season like 2022, minus the tension between Verstappen and Perez, it's something that will hurt the sport in the long term. Obviously, the team would want to see the tension between Verstappen and Perez knocked down, and that is very likely to happen now that Perez understands his role in the team. With Ricciardo waiting in the shadows for a mistake from the Mexican driver, it's evident that Perez wouldn't want his career to end prematurely, which is why he'll bring his A-plus game to every racing weekend. Nevertheless, the season is going to be very interesting, and Red Bull is definitely a team that we need to pay more attention to in 2023. With that being said, what do you think about the innovative design of Red Bull? Do you believe that they have what it takes to sweep the sport and leave the other teams in the dust? Let us know in the comments below.